Pastors, have you ever had people come out of your memorial services or funeral services smiling and laughing and say, "That was the best memorial service I've ever been to"? Have you ever had people come out and say, "Pastor, I go to a lot of these for my friends, but you do that better than anybody I know"? Have you ever had somebody come out for a funeral that you just conducted to somebody you never met and say, "Oh, Pastor, I'm so glad you met them and knew them well. You captured them perfectly. Thank you so much for that wonderful message"? If that's never happened to you, or if you want to know how to do that, stick around, and I'll tell you today on Iced Coffee with Coach. I'm Steve Petty, and I have 3 goals for these videos: to help you become a better pastor and leader, to save you time and money, and to help educate, motivate, and energize you so you can motivate and energize your church. If you find these videos helpful, I hope you'll subscribe. You can check the little box that's kind of down there. And if you have questions or comments, you can add them below, or you can email me at steve@revstevep.com. Today I want to talk about how to conduct a memorial or funeral service. To start the story, I really need to tell you about the first funeral that I was present at and co-conducted. When I was in seminary, way back in the early 70s, my grandfather died. We were in Denver in the Iliff School of Theology, and he was in western Kansas at a little place called Brewster. There was a small Methodist church in town, and they really weren't members or attending any church. But they figured the Methodist church was as good as any, so they called the Methodist pastor, and they said, "We want you to conduct the service. And, oh, by the way, his grandson is coming, and you should find a part for him." Well, this rookie pastor came and met with the family for exactly 5 minutes. We were all sitting in the kitchen, drinking beer, telling stories. He walked in, looked around the room, decided that he wasn't going to have a beer, met with my grandma for a couple minutes, got granddad's birth date, birthplace, other pertinent information, asked if we had any questions. Grandma didn't even know enough to ask any questions. Excused himself and left. We showed up the next day for the funeral service, and he conducted the service, and he said, "Well, okay, you're a pastor. Why don't you read the 23rd Psalm?" I went, "Okay, I can do that." And he said, "And maybe at the end of the service, you could give a prayer." "Okay, I can do that." And then he proceeded to do the service. He introduced the family, which he'd found out everybody's names. Grandpa was survived by, went through everybody. Then he launched into a 20-minute sermon about Paul's theology of death and how we all needed to give our lives to Jesus Christ. And at this time, when we're thinking about life and death, it is the most important time to give our life to Jesus Christ. Never mentioned my grandpa. Never acted like he knew anything about him. Everybody in the family is feeling very, very uncomfortable because actually none of them are churchgoers. And he turned to me after the service and he said, "Would you deliver a prayer?" And I thought, how do I deliver a prayer after that? When all these people are grieving and there's nothing at all been said about Grandpa. So I delivered a prayer that was kind of a eulogy and kind of a prayer, and thanked God for Grandpa, who really was probably better understood by horses and dogs than people, who'd been a rodeo cowboy, who'd worked with the Pony Express, who had a very interesting, not too successful life, was kind of cantankerous and ornery and a genuine cowboy. But we knew that God loved cowboys too, and we asked God to receive him. Amen. Then it was frozen that day because of a big blizzard. They couldn't even put the body in the ground. That's how successful that service was. I went back to seminary and I decided I will never, ever conduct a funeral service for somebody I don't know anything about. That family sitting out there listening to me needs to know that I knew their loved one and that we are celebrating that person's life and that the love of our hearts and the grief that we bear is understood by the pastor who's leading the service. And so I adopted a set of guidelines for how to conduct a service. And I found out that I was really, really good at it. So I'm going to share some of those with you today. Now, I know many of you think you're really, really good too, and I hope you are, and that's wonderful. And you may do this better than me. And I know that everybody has their own theological understanding about a funeral and memorial service. I mean, he was right. This is a moment when we have existential questions about life and death and life after life. So it's a great opportunity to talk about heaven and hell and try to scare everybody into heaven. But it's not really what everybody needs or wants. There's a time for that. And the moment when they are most vulnerable and most hurting, in my opinion, that's not the time for that. So I had some certain guidelines that I kept in mind whenever I conducted a funeral or memorial service. First, allow the people to grieve productively. Second, is to say goodbye and maybe even well done to a loved one. Third, to celebrate the goodness of life and the fullness of living, because all of the people there are still living. To send people out with a message that life has meaning and that their lives can make a difference. And to affirm again that the reason that Jesus came was so we can have life and have it more abundantly. The funeral for my grandfather did none of those things. It sent us away empty. It sent us out into the cold, and we felt cold. So today, I want to talk about how to do it right. Now, first thing, I want to talk about how to prepare. And I know, because I've talked to many young pastors, that these guidelines are not often talked about in seminary. But I hold some essential truths about how to prepare. First of all, if you have a member of your church die and you hear about it soon after, go immediately to meet with the family. I know people who received a phone call and said, well, I can meet with the family Thursday afternoon at 3. No, go now. Go be with them. I was often at the family home before the mortuary arrived. I was there to hold people, to hug them, to love them. If I knew somebody was ill and dying, I was there regularly to pray with them and to hold them and to commend them to God, to ease their passage. You need to do that. And when somebody has passed, you need to be with the family immediately. I tell them some essential things. One is that when the mortuary people come, they're going to ask you all kinds of questions. You don't need to answer any of them. There's plenty of time to do that later. They will want to know, when are we going to have the service? How many people are going to attend? What do you want this kind of funeral package? You need to come down to the funeral parlor right now. No. They don't have to do any of that day. I tell them, relax. I love them. I comfort them. I pray with them. And I tell them their one job that day is simply to breathe. If they get through the end of the day and they're still breathing, that's a successful day. That's the first day of grief. Just breathe. And then I tell them what the mortuary needs to know. Now, I also tell them that I will see them tomorrow. And tomorrow, we can make plans. But today, don't make plans. And leave by praying. Second visit, I go back the next day. I begin with prayer. And then I fill out the funeral information forms. Remember, if the county loses a death certificate, your records become legal records. So you need to leave a record with the church, and you need to carry a record with you always. This is also true for baptisms and weddings. A pastor's records, when you conduct these services, become legal records if the county loses them. So on the second day, we talk about the date and the time and the place for the burial and the services and the memorial. Or do they want a memorial? Do they want a funeral? Do they want it at the church? Do they want it at the funeral parlor? Do they want it at the park? Is it just going to be a graveside service? Is this a simple service? How do they want it done? Whatever they want, I will move heaven and earth to make happen. I don't have a set way of doing things. I don't say, well, you have to have it at the church and it has to be closed casket and it has to be this way and it has to be this way and it has to be this way. Every family has traditions about death that they have already established in their mind. And that's how death happens for them. And you need to accommodate that. Accommodate them. Don't make them accommodate you. And then if there's going to be a reception, who's going to be planning the reception? And I put them in touch with the person at the church that handles receptions. And then I arrange a third meeting. And the third meeting, I tell them it's going to take a while. This will be a longer meeting. As many family members as would like to meet can meet for this meeting. It can be at the church. It can be at their house. It can be a living room. It can be in the social hall. I mean, if there's a lot of people coming, it might want to be in the church lounge. But as many family members as want to come for this meeting are welcome at this meeting. I tell them it's going to take at least an hour, maybe 90 minutes. At that meeting, I tell them, we will also be talking about what scriptures or hymns or special music you want to have. So talk about that with family members. Additionally, are there going to be family members who want to speak? Special people that they worked with that want to speak? There's special events that need to happen around the loss of this person. Are there videos or slideshows? Tell them to prepare those things and we can talk about them in our long meeting. Then, set a time for that meeting, set a place for that meeting, and end with prayer. When I gather with the family for the third visit, we begin the time by talking about the service. I go over the bulletin with them. We talk about what scriptures they have, what hymns they've selected, if there's special music, who's going to sing, how's that going to take place. By the time we're done with the initial part of the meeting, we have the entire service well planned. Then we talk about the deceased. And what I try to do is to create this whole person's life in 90 minutes. So I ask them, where were they born? Why was the family living there? How long did they live there? What was this person's birth in the birth order of siblings? Were they first? Were they last? Were they in the middle? What other siblings were there? How much apart were they? You'd be surprised how important those things are. Then I ask them, what do you know about their childhood? Did they ever tell you about growing up in that town? What was it like? Were they good at school? Did they like their school? How about when they got to middle school or junior high or high school? Were they in a one-room school? Did they go to a big high school? Did they have special activities that they liked? Were they involved in band or music, orchestra, football, baseball, sports, girls' basketball? I mean, what were they involved in? What did they most enjoy about high school? And did they talk about those? After high school, did they go to college? Were they involved in military service? Did they get a first career? Then, about that time, people start meeting their first spouses or their lifelong spouse. So I ask, if the spouse is present, how did you meet? Tell us the story. Tell us the story about why you liked this person. What attracted you to them? Were your friends jealous? Were they happy for you? How did that courtship go? Where did you go when you were dating? Go to the drive-ins? Go to the park? Any number of things. Find out. You'd be surprised how much the spouse wants to tell you those stories and how much the family has never, ever heard them and delights in hearing them now. So get the whole story if the spouse is present. If not, ask the eldest children, did they ever hear these stories? Sometimes they have. Sometimes they have no clue, and those stories are lost forever. Then you might ask, what kind of a partner was this person? Were they always thoughtful and attentive? Were they business-oriented? Did they spend too much time at the office? Did they spend a lot of time at home? Were they involved in the kids when they were growing up? What kind of a family did you have? Again, when, where were the children born? Families move around. Eventually, this becomes kind of a travel log. Families can move in 10 or 12 or 15 different places, or they might spend their whole life in one town. How did that go? Where did they move? Why did they move? What jobs did they have? Get the whole travel log, the whole dialogue, the whole family history. What memories do the children have about growing up, about mom or dad? Then career advancement. What positions did they hold? Did they get any awards or recognitions? What troubles or difficulties did they have? When they got to retirement, what did they plan for retirement? How did retirement go? If this person is a person that had a long health decline, how did that go? How did they deal with that? How did they cope with the inevitability of dying? Also, did they have special interests? Were there hobbies or sports teams that they were really, really involved in? What were their passions? Then I asked some silly questions. Did they have a sense of humor? What was their favorite joke? Did they have a temper? What really, really made them angry? What gave them the most joy in life? And what things did they take the most pride in? Lastly, after 90 minutes of going through all of this and having people almost exhausted, I simply ask, if you could use only one word to describe this person to someone who never met them, what would that word be? There's usually a long pause, and then I go around the room and I ask each person for that one word, and I write them down. Now, crafting the message. I sit down with all of that information and I look through it, and I look for the themes of this person's life. Did they overcome really bad hardships? Did they overcome health problems? Did they overcome the loss of a loved one? Did they overcome the loss of a child? What things did they overcome, and how did they overcome them? I try to make it a point to celebrate the whole life. Very often, if a person is elderly and they've had the last few years in severe decline, people can only see these years of decline. They only see this feeble person. But by bringing out childhood, youth, romance, family, you bring this whole person's life in front of them and you celebrate the whole life, the abundance of this whole life lived before them. For many people, you're introducing them to a person they never met. So the second thing is I try to say, what is this person's gift to us? How did God gift them? And what gifts did they give to us through their living? What things did we learn from them that will always stay with us? How did they leave us better? What did they teach us about living? And remembering the things that they taught us. And maybe, if they're really worthwhile things, trying to exemplify those people with how we live our lives. The most fitting memorial is for people to say, I learned this from so-and-so, and I try to do it a little bit every day. That's a memorial. That's a life that has been touched and changed. Then, again, I conduct the service in a way that celebrates this person's life. I conduct it with a sense of joy. If we have congregational sharing, which we often did, I would ask people to share funny stories. I would ask people to share embarrassing stories. I would ask people to share briefly, because sometimes that can get way too long. But I keep it light. Let's celebrate the good things we learned, the wonderful things that we celebrated, the times that this person filled our lives with joy. And you would be surprised how quickly the congregation rallies to that theme. And then at the end, I offer a benediction, and I thank God for this life, and I commend their soul to God, and I commend the congregation to go forth to live a life that honors the gifts that God gave us in this person. Probably 50% of the services I conducted were people I had never, ever met, or only briefly known. But I have to tell you, every time someone would come out and say, it's so good that you knew them so well. You just captured them perfectly. I just smile and say, that's so kind of you. Thank you very much. And then I go home and my wife says to me, let me guess. Somebody came out and said, thank you. You knew them so well. And I say, yep. I usually conduct the service by starting in a somber tone but I move rather quickly into celebration. I remind them that Jesus was the pastor who brought us a learning about life and death, that Jesus is in charge of life and death, and that means that this person is not going off to die. They are going off to live. And so we celebrate the living they did here and the living they do now with the Lord. And we celebrate it by thanking God for them. And so this service today, people, is going to be a Thanksgiving service and a celebration service. And then I conduct the rest of the service with that attitude. So that's how I do a funeral service or memorial service. I make it a point to know this person really, really well. And I make it a point to celebrate their life very, very specially. Because I don't want anybody to go through a service like I went through for my grandpa. So think about it. Plan for it. Do it really, really well. Your people will love you for it. Next week, I'm going to be talking about something you all want to hear about. Reacting to criticism. Are there people in your church who criticize you? Are there people who do it regularly? Especially now in pandemic times, are you getting criticism? We'll talk about criticism and how to react appropriately and what you need to know about people who are criticizing you. As always, if you find these videos valuable, I hope you will subscribe to my channel. And if you have questions or comments, you can add them below or email me. See you next week on Iced Coffee with Coach. Can you hear the ice? Bye.